Hello and welcome to another episode in this series where I'm given a topic, generally by my son Chucky, and I do my best to explain that topic or at least give some cool information and tidbits that you might not know. Last week we covered great white sharks and I ran into a few technical issues during filming. I believe I've overcome those issues, but I guess we'll just have to find out. Now I'm working on getting my videos to be a little shorter, so let's skip the rest of the channel information that I usually put at the beginning and we'll go ahead and just take care of all that at the end of the video so that way we can get to rolling. Alright, so this week's topic was picked once again by Chucky, as seen by the intro, Xenomorphs. Originally, I know the comment, keep pointing to the wrong side, the comment says Backburster, which was in one of the newer movies, and it wasn't really there for very long. So, with further clarification from Chuck, he changed from just Backbursters to Xenomorphs in general. And due to my lack of general knowledge of copyright issues, as well as the fact that I, personally feel that the last two Alien movies weren't really beneficial to the storyline of the whole series, Chuck has agreed that instead of just doing an in-depth info and history on Xenomorphs, I can instead do a compilation of real-world organisms that share similar properties to the Xenomorphs. So I went through and I was looking at the specific abilities and attributes of the Xenomorph and seeing what animals and other organisms alive today share similar properties, and I found some pretty surprising ones. So I will say, starting now, spoiler warning, all but one of the movies concerning Xenomorphs have been out for at least 6 years, with the first movie, Alien, being released nearly 40 years ago. So the most recent movie was Alien Covenant, which came out in 2017, when it's nearly 2019 now. So I'm assuming most people have seen it if they're watching this, but don't really worry about it because Xenomorphs aren't really covered that much in that movie. Prior information. So if you haven't seen any of those movies and you don't want any possible spoilers, this is what you do. You keep playing this video, but you mute it. So that way you let the time run out, you don't hear anything, and I can still get those sweet, sweet views that I feel validate my endeavors on YouTube. Sound good? Sounds good. Alright, so with that being said, let's get started. Now, there are 6 movies currently in the Alien franchise. Starting at the beginning, they are Alien, Aliens, then you've got Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, then after that you've got the prequel called Prometheus. It is a prequel to the other 4. And then the next one after that, number 6, is a sequel to the prequel, but still a prequel to the others. And that's called Alien Covenant. That's the one that came out in 2017. Now, on top of that, there's another 2 films. Let's put them about right here. Alright, and they're part of the Predator franchise, and that's Alien vs. Predator and Alien vs. Predator, well, Aliens vs. Predator Requiem. Alright, in the first 4 movies, that'd be Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien Resurrection. The main antagonist of well, those and up here, the main antagonist is the species of alien known as a xenomorph. In the 2 prequels, the alien bad guys aren't the xenomorphs so much, but rather a progression of different stages of pre-xenomorph that haven't evolved to the point where they are what we know them as for xenomorphs. Essentially, in the first 2, it's more about this black goo that mutates existing life into various forms, but I'd need 2 days and a flowchart to explain exactly how each stage of evolution fits into the story, so let's just move on. So this is what you came to see. This is a xenomorph that grew inside of a human during his pupal life stage. So this is what you get when it's human DNA used. Alright, so move that over here. A xenomorph is an around 7 foot tall bipedal creature with a skeletal and almost biomechanical appearance. They are generally a shiny black, kind of like a darkling beetle. One here for reference. Not all of them are, but generally that's the color you see in most of the movies. There's some variation. They have a long segmented tail with a blade-like tip that they can use as a weapon. Throughout the different series you'll see slight variations to the tail, but once again it all depends on the designer of the movie and if they come from something else. But we're just going to cover the basic xenomorph that you probably think of from Alien, the first one. Alright, so they have elongated cylindrical skulls with no apparent eyes. So nothing like here, they're like this. But due to different designs, as I was talking about throughout the franchise, it isn't agreed whether they have eyes or not. Some of the original concepts, the front of the skull was more of a translucent, just like a translucent covering for the front of their head, so they had eyes but they saw through the front of their skull. Some say they have no eyes at all and they see using the electrical signals from the environment around them, similar to the way sharks do. And then there's a completely different group of people that are saying that xenomorphs see through a method of echolocation like bats. So, moving on, the lower front of the skull, mouth, it's where mouth, relatively large mouth, but it doesn't go back very far, so it's just right there. The mouth is adorned with nearly metallic looking teeth, depending on which picture you look at, but when I saw it in the movies they looked almost like they were metal. They could be, you know, they could be the same material as their external chitin, their shells, but covered in slime that makes them look shiny like metal. But that's what they look like. So here comes the next part of the mouth is the second set of jaws. Now, when I say second set of jaws, you think like here, but it's like inside of their mouth, tucked back. And what happens is it can be shot out of the mouth. And depending on the movie, about that, yeah. So it's strong, can punch through materials, punch through people. It assists in attacking or grabbing prey. Essentially, to make it really simple, it looks like a rigid tube with more metallic teeth on the front, and that they can stick out like a tongue, so like that, except a lot further out. Now to the good part. Based off of just the appearance alone, we can start listing off a few real-world animals that have appearances or adaptations similar to portions of the xenomorph. Now, there's nothing here that's exactly like or has a multitude of adaptations that are the same as the xenomorph, but there's some that are pretty close. Let's start with what I just mentioned, the second set of jaws. So there is a creature on Earth that has a surprisingly similar set of physiology, and more than likely you know this animal, you've seen it. If you've been to an aquarium or a zoo that has sea life, they generally, pretty much everywhere I've ever been that's had an aquarium, large aquarium setup, has had these. This animal is the moray eel. So the green tube-like animal that just looks really super mean, that's always sticking out of rocks in the back of the aquarium. So the moray eel has what is called a pharyngeal jaw. It's a second set of jaws that, when at rest, will sit contained in the throat of the eel. So like back and open like that while it's at rest. Now the second set of jaws doesn't extend out of the mouth like you'd see with the xenomorph. So in the movie you see the xenomorph, it opens its mouth and then boom, 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 mouth comes flying out. But rather, when the moray eel bites down on prey, with its initial main set of jaws, what happens is it bites down, turn this way, bites down, and then the second set of jaws, while it's already clamped down, moves up and grabs the prey. And then when it comes back, it pulls the animal a little bit further into the throat of the moray eel. Now, this purpose is essentially so that way when, fish are kind of slippery. So if you bite down and you don't bite down right the first time, the fish could get away, or the other prey creature. So what these second set of jaws do is it's a secondary set to ensure that the creature that they grabbed onto gets a little bit further down their throat, and lessens the chance of escape. What's really cool about this is now this development has been in moray eels for, well, as long as moray eels as a species has been around, which is a long time. But humans honestly didn't even know about this mechanic inside of the jaw, or inside of the throat of the moray eel. We've had them in aquariums for so long, but we didn't know that this was actually going on. Now, it's easy for us to miss it because when they bite down, that's when this happens, so you're not seeing it happen actively outside of the mouth. The mouth is closed, you can't see it. But a team of researchers that were studying moray eels in 2007, and that's when they found out about it. Now that's nearly 30 years. 2007 is nearly 30 years after the first Alien movie, showing xenomorphs already having this unique adaptation. So that's some pretty good foresight, or just imagination on the design crew to come up with something like that without even really having a reference on the planet to go with. But there are some references they could have pulled from. There are some fish and other fish species that have what's called pharyngeal teeth and also pharyngeal jaws, but none of them operate in the same extendable fashion as with the moray eel. They're just there as a secondary grip for when they suck an animal in, but most fish use negative pressure, so when they open their mouth, water comes rushing in, and with that water comes their prey. Well, the eels can't do that, so they can only lash out and grip, and when they lash out and grip, that other fish has time to back away. And if it's partially backed away and you only get a little bit of a bite, that's where that second set comes in, grabs, and pulls that other fish in. I'll use graphics on one of these sides to help explain. Let's say here, I'll put a little diagram. How's that look? Is that a pretty diagram? Does that help explain? I sure hope it does. Better than my hands, at least. So yeah, pharyngeal jaw with the moray eel, something that's in common with xenomorphs. Now, one might think that there's no way there could be a creature on Earth that looks anything like a xenomorph. Now, thinking that makes sense, but you'd be surprisingly wrong. It's true that you wouldn't be able to find a creature with the similar, biomechanical look, almost skeletal, outside of a special effects studio, which is where the xenomorphs come from. But there is one creature that does share the distinct crown and body shape to that of the xenomorph queen. This creature is so similar, in fact, that it's been a long-standing rumor that the xenomorph designer, the guy that drew up the concept and went to the studio and made the costumes up, it's considered that he used these creatures as the inspiration for the xenomorph queen. It's such a believable rumor, actually, that even Sir David Attenborough made this claim on the TV show The Blue Planet, which was a 2001 BBC Nature documentary. Now, this creature's called the Phronema parasite. and it can be found in nearly all of the world's oceans, with exception to the polar regions. Now, the Phronima is a genus of small deep-sea amphipods, which amphipods are part of the crustacean subphylum, not the phylum, just a step below, subphylum, which makes them related to shrimp, crab, lobsters. They're crustaceans. So, I'm going to put a picture here. Alright, so this is the Phronima parasite, right here. Alright, so as you can see by this picture, there is, minus the color, don't worry about the color, but there is a slight resemblance between them and the queen xenomorph. Now, obviously, there are slight similarities. It can be stated that, oh no, they look nothing alike. It just depends on the angle. I've seen some angles of the Phronima that don't look anything like it, but from the front, they've got that big crown, which is actually where they've got another set of eyes up there, so they can watch the waters above them. But that dome shape is similar to the queen in the way that they stay inside of their little tubes. The xenomorph queen crest and the body shape up in that tube aren't actually the only similarities that this creature has, which is why it seems like, yeah, if you really watch these animals, there could be made an assumption that this is the inspiration. But the similarity outside of appearance is the chest burster aspect of the xenomorph. Now, they both have young that develop inside of a host body, and when developed enough, they will leave that host body by bursting out of it. Now, with xenomorphs, they bust out of the chest, or in various other different, pre-xenomorph versions, they come out of the back, which is the back burster that Chuck asked for originally. But with the Phronima, they burst out of what is called a salp. Now, to explain that, I'm going to have to start at the beginning and start with the adult Phronima. Now, they don't just live inside of a host while they're young during development. The adult Phronima will find a salp. Now, a salp is part of the family Salpidae and are barrel-shaped, free-floating tourniquets. Tourniquets are funny animals. They're similar to jellyfish, but weirdly enough, they're actually one of the few invertebrates that are in the Chordata phylum. Chordata, remember from the shark video? Chordata, I said if it's a vertebrate, it's Chordata, think of a spine or a backbone. This one doesn't have a spine or a backbone, but it does have the precursors to that, which are the presence of a dorsal nerve cord, notochords, and whatnot. So, like I said, it is an invertebrate, but it's still a part of the Chordata. Alright, but enough on that. Let's get back to the Phronima. The newly emerged Phronima parasite, as it hatches and bursts forth from its original salp, will hunt down a salp floating through the ocean. And from there, they proceed to catch the salp with the little claws that they've got. Oh, claws. They catch, grab on, and then they start to eat the salp alive. Now, it's really messed up, but what they do is they start from one end and they just eat straight through the center of it. And what they do is they leave behind essentially a jelly barrel. This barrel is then what the Phronima parasite uses as shelter, flotation device, source of nutrients, and as well as a mobile nursery for future generations of Phronima. Cool fact about that is they've actually discovered that the salp, even though the interior of it is dead and eaten, so pretty much any bit of nervous system that it's got is gone. The outside is still technically full of living cells. So it's kind of like if somebody took your brain out and then just kept your body living and just kept you around for whatever reason. It's cool, but it's messed up. But it's nature. So the future generations of the front of a parasite that are laid inside of this tunnel by the female will develop in their eggs inside of these inner walls of the hollow out cell. Then from there they hatch and they will feed on the interior lining of that salt until they're big enough to burst out through the salt and carry on the process, starting it all over again. Now, the chest bursting ability of the xenomorph is surprisingly one of the adaptations that they have most in common with other real-world organisms. At least I would say so, seemingly, once you start looking into it. There's actually many species on Earth that share the trait of laying eggs in or on a host creature, so that way when the eggs hatch, the young can then feed on and eventually emerge from, if laid inside, a host in a chest-bursting fashion. Now, usually what comes to mind on this one are the most famous ones are the types of parasitoid wasps. Now, these wasps will find prey, paralyze the prey with a stinger. Now, different kinds of toxins are used. There's even one that'll sting into the brain to make a creature docile, as opposed to injecting something. They just destroy part of that creature's brain. Now, then they'll, after stinging and rendering the prey pretty much useless, they'll drag the prey back to a safe burrowing site. And then from there, they'll lay eggs inside of that prey. Now, the prey will then remain inside of the safe burrow area, sheltered so no other creatures can get to it, and it will remain alive. And a few days after the eggs are laid, the eggs hatch. So now this alive, pretty much comatose type insect or other creature now has a small little parasitoid wasp larva inside of it. Now, these larvae will then have a fresh meal, constant fresh meal, waiting for them once they hatch. They will eat the insides of this creature until they either become too big to remain inside of the host, or they've developed enough that they can safely leave the host. And then at that moment, they find a spot where they can burst out. So, there, you got a multitude, there's so many parasitoid wasp species, so you've got a multitude there of creatures that are similar to the xenomorphs, and on top of that, there's also many species of fly that do essentially the same thing. Now, there is a slight difference in the manner that they do it, but it's pretty much the same. Now, these flies would be like bot flies, blow flies, warble flies, and what they do is they land on a creature. A lot of times it's livestock, but it can happen to humans. They land on a creature and then lay their egg just under the skin of that larger creature, and then that egg will stay inside and incubate and then hatch. And then from there, that larva will start to move around underneath the skin and consume flesh until it gets large enough that it can emerge. So unlike the parasitoid wasp that definitely kill its host when it emerges after growing to a certain extent, these wasp larvae, or not wasp larvae, sorry, these fly larvae or maggots will burst forth from the skin. To put it in a way that you can visualize it, it's like the world's most disgusting, painful, and wiggly zit. It's pretty gross. I thought about putting up an image here for you to see that, but I'm not going to because it's really kind of gross. So instead, I'll just put a picture of what the fly looks like. That work? That works. Okay, so far we have some really good examples of animals that share the second set of jaws, similar appearance, and young that burst out of the host bodies. I think I covered enough to satisfy the backburster the desire at the beginning, Chuck. But from there, you'd think that there wouldn't be any other creature on Earth that could possibly share any other similarity with these aliens. Especially the trait similar to one important Xenomorph adaptation that I've left off this list, even though it's really, really famous for it, which is the acid blood. It's seen in nearly all movies of the Alien franchise, as well as it's a pretty big plot point in the Predator crossover movies as well, where a Xenomorph, if they take any damage that would cause it to bleed, a yellow-green, relatively viscous liquid starts to spill out of them. Now, as soon as this liquid hits anything other than the Xenomorph, it begins to just dissolve that item. So it's essentially just the strongest acid you could ever come up with. You know, it's something you could fathom. Now, we've got really strong acids on Earth, but comparing them to what's shown to happen in the movies, the acid blood that they have blows every acid on Earth out of the water. Now, to show how powerful it is, it's put into perspective, and it's exhibited well in the first movie, Alien, where some of the acid blood, falls on the floor of the med bay inside the ship Nostromo. As soon as the blood hits the floor, it starts to eat, just dissolve a hole, just a big hole right in that floor in seconds. And that also results in acid, so each of the floor, the acid drips down to the next floor, and where it hits, and it also begins to dissolve another hole in that floor. And now this is all in mere moments that this happens. Now there's nothing on Earth that reacts that quickly with the various different compounds that would be in a ship's hull and floors, which would be metals and some, composites. And granted, it's future tech, we don't know specifically, but a comparable materials you could look at on Earth would be like plastics, other composites, and then you've got, stainless steel, and you've got any kind of iron, copper for any wires that it eats through, rubbers. So it just went through all of it. And after thinking about how a Xenomorph has blood that can dissolve nearly anything, you have to also kind of think that there's no way an animal on this planet could possibly have that ability. And you're right. There are no creatures on Earth that have blood corrosive enough to dissolve nearly anything. But with that being said, there is an insect that has the ability to fire hot, boiling, corrosive liquid at attackers. Similar to acid in the burn category, and it's very, very, very dangerous. At least at a small scale when you talk about other insects. So this insect is called the bombardier beetle. Now, this isn't just one specific species. As a matter of fact, there are more than 500 individual species that can claim the title of a bombardier beetle, or the classification of bombardier beetle, and they all belong to a family, Keartes. Yeah, Keartes. Now, when these beetles are, out and about, going about their, beetly business, and another organism rocks up to it and gets too close, or the insect starts to, the beetle starts to feel threatened, they don't have to do what the Xenomorphs do and cut themselves open, hurt themselves just to access blood so they can spray a burning defense all over the threat. Instead, these beetles have a system contained within their bodies that allows for this hot defense mechanism. Now, inside of the abdomen, near the very far back of the abdomen, so the beetle butt, there are two separate storage reservoirs. Now, inside of each of these is a chemical. One contains a chemical called hydroquinone, and the other holds hydrogen peroxide. Now, these two storage reservoirs are separate. They do not touch. There's no way that one chemical can get to the other, except for both of them have one single tube out the back. So here's the reservoirs, tubes that run down and meet. Now, at this meeting point, the two tubes join together and then go out of the rear of the beetle. When the beetle then feels threatened, I'll just do this. Over here. Still figuring out the directions. It's mirrored. Alright, so you've got, let's say, reservoir number 1 over here, and then you've got reservoir 2 over here, and then you've got the two tubes that come down to the center, and then the exit tube, and then this would be the back of the beetle. I know that's a little slanted. Let me, it'll look better in post. I may not point to it directly, but I'll point close enough. Now, what happens is that first reservoir that contains, was it hydroquinone, and the second reservoir that contains hydrogen peroxide, they've got valves at the bottom where the tubes meet. Now, these valves are activated, and it allows some of those chemicals to be pushed into the tubes. Now, when the chemicals are pushed into the tubes, initially at the tops of the tube, there's no meeting, so they're inert, they're inactive. But once it gets down to the meeting point in the center, where they touch, these chemicals have what's called a exothermic reaction, a highly exothermic reaction. Exothermic means that the reaction has a release of a large amount of energy, which in general is heat. Thermic. Heat is just a form of kinetic energy contained within atoms. The opposite of this is an endothermic reaction, which will absorb heat or the kinetic energy from surroundings. So this is an exothermic reaction. Now, the oxidizing reaction between the chemicals produces water and a substance called p-quinone. So the hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide come together, release a bunch of energy, and produce water and p-quinone. The resulting heat energy that is released inside of these chemicals will heat these byproducts to the boiling point. And this whole time you got to remember that this is happening inside of a tiny tube at the butt end of a small beetle. So the pressures inside of this tube, grows and grows and grows and becomes a danger unless there's a proper system in place to relieve that pressure. So there is. What happens is the tube leading out of the beetle has a valve on it as well, but it's a pressure release valve essentially. So when the pressure grows to a certain extent, this valve automatically opens, pops. You hear it, an audible pop. It opens to shoot all of this building pressure up, while also at the top end of the tube where the reservoirs are, the valves that activated, they're also pressure type valves. So what happens is it goes in the opposite direction. The pressure builds on the bottom and forces the valve to close. So the pressure holds that closed. So this is the reservoir up here, and this is the pressure. So now that pressure gets backed up into the insect, and you don't have any secondary chemical reactions inside of those reservoirs. So from there, you've got all of this boiling hot liquid being forced out of the rear end of a bombardier beetle. Now, this boiling hot water and foul-smelling chemical, they get sprayed in a way where some of the beetles just spray an area, but then there's also some beetles that have the ability to contort their abdomens up or underneath or to the side, so that way they can shoot a directed shot of hot, corrosive, and irritating and foul-smelling liquid all over the predator or the threat that's coming after them. And on top of that, at their size and the creatures that would go after them, this is actually pretty lethal to a lot of the threats to a bombardier beetle, because they have the ability to basically shoot off this fireworks display of hot liquid just at a rate of 70 pulses per minute, and that's usually one burst is a 70 pulses, and then they're able to do that 20 times total before their reservoirs are empty. So the the beetle will do it once. If the threat's still there, still alive, still coming after it, they'll do it again, and then they'll do it again, and they'll do it again, and it could end up killing the threat. Seriously. And you wouldn't think about it, but hot scalding liquid at a smaller scale, say it gets all over an ant, it's going to cook that ant pretty quick. Okay, well, there you have some real-world examples of animals that share traits with the xenomorph. Now, I need to make sure that you understand that I'm speaking of only the xenomorphs that come out of humans. Xenomorphs, the eggs and the facehuggers can get onto multiple species, as seen in Alien vs. Predator. And what happens is a xenomorph facehugger that impregnates a different species than human, that resulting xenomorph is going to exhibit traits that could be anywhere from slightly different all the way to fundamentally changing the xenomorph to the point where you can't even call him a xenomorph anymore. So, if you want to know more, by all means, there's fan pages, there's all sorts of secondary material that you can get a hold of. There's comic books and stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure I've got, personally, I've got Batman vs. Predator, but I think there's a Batman vs. Alien comic series. I know that there's a couple of different crossover alien xenomorph comic series. Plus there's novels and stuff like that. A lot of fan-based stuff as well. But by all means, Google xenomorph if you want to know more specifics. And I'm sure you can run down the gambit of all the different species that there are within the Alien franchise. Alright, so with all of the things that I just told you about, just like in previous weeks, I did go online to fact check all of my previous statements. Pretty sure I'm correct on all of them after fact checking. And I'd like to thank Jake Young from Dorkly.com, Sarah Keartes, hope I'm saying that right, of Nerdist.com, and Katie O'Dwyer of TheConversation.com. I'd like to thank them for their contributions that help make this video possible. I will have the links to their materials down below. Also, thank you to the contributors of Wikipedia. Once again, a very, very valuable resource. But if you use it, check your resources, or check their resources. From there, I just have to say that I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a like so that I'm not, so I know I'm not talking to dead space here. And by all means, if you want me to struggle my way through another topic, just leave your topic suggestions below, and I'll do my best to at least partially make an informative video. If I fail at that, then at least you can be entertained and make fun of me afterwards, as long as it's afterwards, so that way I can still get the view count, you know, because that's what I want. Along with any topics, if you have any channel suggestions or changes that you'd like to see in my format, in my delivery, in my location, in the graphics that I use, in my editing software, I'm still learning it, still pushing my way through there. I'd love to hear them. I don't care who you are. Just tell me if you think I can make something better, and I'll do what I can to see if I can improve in those directions. Still pretty new to this, and I'd like to take every opportunity that I can to, you know, fix the channel in ways that make it more, you know, viewer friendly and possibly more presenter friendly, because this takes a lot longer than I thought it would to make these videos. I will mention that if you do subscribe, go ahead and hit that little bell icon so that you can get the notifications for when I post new videos. I try to stick to the same schedule as best as I can, but like especially with this week, you got holidays coming up, so it kind of limits your days through the week. Christmas is coming up, New Year's is coming up, I might have to move them around. Plus, I always see all the big name YouTubers say, hey, when you subscribe, click the little bell icon. So I figure I might as well act like them if I want to be like them, right? Reach for the stars. Video wise, I try to do one gaming and one informative video a week. I just uploaded my episode 3 video of the series Attempting Minecraft Survival. Spoiler alert, in that one I get attacked by skeletons way too many times for me to believe that I have it set in easy mode. It was ridiculous. But past that, I think that's really all I have, and once again, thank you. Thank you for everyone that views. Thank you for everyone that likes. Thank you for my subscribers. And really, you know, I'm striving to make things better, and hopefully you stick with me. But other than that, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you.